Good afternoon, everyone. We'll give participants a few moments to be able to log on and get started shortly. Good afternoon and welcome to Stock Talk. My name is Sean Kabak and I will be your host along with Pam Iwanchesko and Aaron Dieterle and Lori Forbes, who will be helping out. I heard it's Pam's birthday today, so I'd like to wish her happy birthday. I won't say how old she is, but it starts with a piot and ends in a 0. So if you can figure that out, good for you. Manitoba Agriculture is offering a series of livestock and forage webinars to help Manitoba beef and forage producers. The webinars started in December and will run monthly until April. We are glad you can join us for today's presentations, which will be recorded so you can view them at a future date, or if you can't make the 1 o'clock start time. It was great to see everyone last week at the Manitoba Beef Producers AGM, where we were able to reconnect and learn more about the beef industry from the knowledgeable speakers. For producers who signed up for the herd management program, you had until the end of January to make purchases. Claims must be submitted by February the 17th. So please submit your claim. Since we are approximately halfway through the winter feeding period, now is a good time to reassess your feed supplies and cattle condition and performance. Is cow body condition adequate, or do you have to increase the energy level with some grain or silage? Do you still have half of your feed supplies available to make it through the winter to when the grass will be growing in the spring? Last month on Stock Talk, we heard from Canfex on cattle markets and the benefits of cover crops to improve soil health and provide livestock forage. If you missed these presentations, you can go back and watch the recording. Because our presentations today are pre-recorded, we won't be taking any questions for the presenters. Since auction marts opened up after the Christmas break, we have seen some really strong calf prices over and above the good fall and year-end prices. So to provide a cattle market update and outlook for 2023, we have Rick Wright of Rick Wright Cattle Consulting, and I'd like to welcome Rick. And I'll just queue up his presentation.
Good afternoon and welcome to Stock Talk. I'm Rick Wright. I've been a cattle buyer and an auction mart operator in this area for 43 years. I buy a lot of cattle out of Manitoba and southeast Saskatchewan. I have customers all the way from Quebec to Alberta and the northern United States. Over my last 43 years, I don't think I've ever been as excited as I am now when I look into the forecast, the crystal ball of what the cattle market's going to do for 2023 and beyond. So today, I'm going to share my thoughts with you on the cattle market outlook for 2023. Tighter cattle and beef supplies in 2023 appear to be a foregone conclusion at this particular time. We know that we have fewer cows and heifers to calve in the next year, and that implies tighter supplies of feeder cattle for the next year and higher prices. The market fundamentals provide significant support to stronger cattle prices moving forward, and I think this is more than just a one-trick pony. This has got some legs under it. We can expect the prices to be good for this fall, the following year, and maybe the following 2 years after that, as long as we don't get a black swan such as a drought. Optimism has never been higher in the cattle industry. Steady beef prices, good export demand, and the tightening of cattle supplies, along with the promise of a smaller calf crop in 2023 and smaller calf crops moving forward, have the people in the beef sector eagerly awaiting some profit forecasts. All indications point that 2027 will be the major rebuilding year in the cattle business and the cow herds in the U.S. In Canada, we're probably looking at a small rebuild in 2024, and expansion is not on the horizon. I truly believe that the cow-calf operators have the best potential to benefit from these upswing in the major cattle prices. I think that this has potential to see prices higher than they were in 2015. 2015 was the last year that we really had a bonus market and some profitability for the cow-calf operators in Canada. And as I mentioned before, I think that this price increase has some legs in it. It's not a one-trick pony. We're going to see prices continue to at least 2025, and if we're correct on our estimations of 2027 for the rebuild, we could experience good prices and higher prices than today right into 2026. So why is the market going up? Well, the cattle supply inventory has dropped significantly in the last 4 years. The U.S. cow herd is the smallest it's been in the last 50 years, and drought conditions will contribute to further culling in 2023. The drought conditions in the Midwest and south part of the U.S. are still quite strong, and cattle producers there are still liquidating. Experts in the U.S. are predicting there'll be about 800,000 less cattle for sale in the U.S. this year, and they're predicting we could have up to 1 million less calves from the U.S. market to sell in 2024. Another thing that's happened in the U.S. is that the cattle have gone on feed earlier and lighter. So if you look at the USDA on feed reports, you will see that it shows that there really isn't much of a shortage of cattle at this particular time. The shortage is coming very, very quickly. The shortage will be in the cattle that are not in captivity right now, the cattle that are not in the feedlots. Once that inventory in the feedlots have been finished and harvested, and they go to replace those cattle and replace that inventory, that's where we're going to see an inventory driven market and a price surge in the prices. So let's take a quick look at the U.S. cow herd. We've had 4 years of continuous liquidation in the U.S. cow herds. We're down to 28.9 million cows, and that's down another 4% this year, and there's been very little heifer retention again in 2022. Most of the heifers went into the feedlots, were finished and harvested, and we had record numbers of beef production in the U.S. in 2022, and record numbers of heifers that were harvested. They also had record number of cow slaughter due to the drought conditions, record number of cows going to the auction marts, and eventually finding their way into the packing plants. You know, the high prices that they're experiencing right now for hay and feed in a lot of the cattle areas in the U.S. will impact the decision making on expansion. As I mentioned earlier, we don't expect any expansion or rebuild of any type in the U.S. for the next couple of years, and it could be right into 2027 before we see them getting back to some decent numbers. As a matter of fact, experts are already talking that we could see a further decline of 500,000 cattle out of the U.S. Those will be cows over the next 2 years. This chart tells you exactly what we're talking about. If you look at the numbers are in red, or 2022, the blue numbers are 2021. For most of 2022, we had more cattle on feed than we did the previous year. A lot of that was drought related, especially at the end of the year. Once we got into December, we saw some fairly heavy marketings and a little less placements. And so you'll see that graph when we get into 2023. We should see less cattle on feed than we saw in the previous years, and that should continue right through 2023. Looking north of the border at the Canadian cow inventory, well, cow numbers in Canada have also shrunk. We've had a steady decline in the beef cow numbers right since 2006, when we had the peak number of inventory due to BSE. You know, we've had drought conditions throughout 2021 in most of Western Canada. We had some wet conditions the year before up in northeastern Manitoba, where we saw some of the biggest and best cow herds in the province of Manitoba that were liquidated, and most of those guys have not rebought back in. And we had terrible weather conditions in the late spring of 2022. We had 4 weeks of Colorado lows come in right in the peak of calving time. We had producers in Manitoba that lost over 25% of their calves, and they also shipped those open cows directly to the market in the springtime. They were short of feed, a little nervous about where the pasture conditions were going to be for the summer of 2022, and they have not replaced those particular animals. You know, another thing that's leading to a liquidation and a contraction of the cattle numbers in Manitoba, poor profitability for the cow-calf producers. That's nothing that you don't already know, but it is a fact. There hasn't been a lot of profit for the investment, a lot of the work, and a lot of the fellas are just giving up and they're going home. You know, we have a lot of producer fatigue, and that's certainly, I've never seen so many people in the cattle business that are just tired of the work, and they said, we've had enough. we've had enough and we're quitting, we're going to do something else, and we're not seeing a big uptake. It's pretty easy to sell your farm, so a lot of fellows are getting out of the business, and that producer fatigue is right across the entire western provinces. This particular slide deals with the profitability in the industry, and if you look to the right hand side in the last box, you'll see that the orange, that's the cow-calf sector. Now, we've had pretty good returns on the investments in 14 and 15. 16 collapsed pretty quickly, recovered a little in 17, but since 18 we've seen a steady decline in erosion, a deterioration of the profits in the cow-calf sector. As you can see, the feedlots have not been doing all that well. The finishing haven't been doing all that well. The interesting part of this particular slide is the green ink on the right side. All the way since 2019, the packers have been experiencing huge profits. They've had they're pretty much their own way, and we're not going to see that change. Folks, there's no chance of any major packing companies coming into Canada expanding. We just don't have enough cattle with the numbers starting to deplete on both sides of the border. Our labor laws are not conducive to the packing industry, and certainly Canada is not attractive for any more expansion. So, the existing packers, and there's not very many of them, don't have a lot of competition, and they pretty much have a stranglehold on the industry. And they have not been sharing those profits with the feeding industry, and when it's not shared with the feeding industry, it doesn't trickle down to the cow-calf operations. So profitability moving forward is still going to be a challenge. Ranch management is going to become, like it always has been, a very critical part of your success. Let's take a quick look at the Canadian cow market here. It's opened up in January with the cow market fairly steady to strong. They were averaging 9,000 cows to kill per week. The packers have harvested their captive supply and they've returned back to the market to purchase cows. This is nothing new. Usually in December, the packers start to put away cows that they're buying at the auction mart, so they've got an inventory to kill over the Christmas break. And it usually takes about a week to 10 days to get the numbers flowing at the auction marts in the new year. They want to make sure they've got inventory to fill the chain at the plant, and of course they do that by stockpiling the cows. But they're through them now, and I think the lack of the non-fed cattle could push the cow market between $1.15 and $22. It could be here right now as we're talking. If not, it'll be here shortly. And I think after we get through the first quarter of 23, there's going to be such a shortage of non-fed cattle that we could see cow prices up as high as 25 cents a pound higher than what we're seeing right now. There's going to be strong demand for ground beef and for trim, and the supply and demand ratio is going to kick in, and certainly the demand is going to outstrip the supply. Bull prices, a little bit different story. They're driven by the U.S. market and by the exchange. They should remain fairly strong for the first quarter. We'll see a few more bulls on offer as trade-in season comes into March. We get by that seasonal glut, we should see a pretty strong market for the bulls throughout the summer months as well, as long as the exchange stays close to where it is today. This chart put together by Canfax just basically shows you where the cattle inventory has been in Canada. And we look at 2006, that's when we were at the peak. We had a sharp decline into 2012 over those 6 years, and we've had a steady decline in the cattle numbers in Canada since that particular time, and that should continue for the next 1 to 2 years. One of the good news stories coming out of the cattle industry is that the feeding industry in Western Canada is expanding. The feedlot industry in Alberta especially, we've seen a number of consolidations of bigger operations. We've seen some of the big guys buy out the smaller guys. We've seen a number of retrofits of older feedlots, bringing them up to standard. A lot of the fellows are trying to get their infrastructure in place before the regulations make it too tough to expand or build new. They can go in the grandfather clause. As they expand, they need to keep those pens full. Empty pens don't make them any money. And that's made Alberta a very big competitor in the feeder cattle market. As a matter of fact, in the last 3 years, we've seen American feeder cattle coming into the west and into the east to feed. In the west, they're coming out of Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota. In the east, we see a lot of Missouri cattle coming up into Ontario. There's been a few North Carolina cattle coming up as well. They like those American cattle coming up. Most of them are double vaccinated. They've been weaned and on feed, and they work very well in the feedlot industry. Manitoba back at home here, we continue to be a backgrounding province, and it looks like we probably got 100% utilization of our backgrounding operations here, and we could stand with a little bit of an expansion, whether that's going to happen or not. The backgrounding part of the province in Manitoba is extremely important to the industry because it supports the local calf trade. The local calf trade, a lot of these fellows are buying their calves at the markets or direct off the farms. They like to see them stay in Manitoba for 100, 120 days, and then they can move them to the final finishing lots, when they have space, when they got pen space, when they have trucks. It works into their convenience rather than being at the mercy of the auction mart, having to buy them on one day and pay whatever the price is. Of course, the cattle, they start better after a long trip when they've been backgrounded. There's a lot of benefits to the industry with Manitoba being a backgrounding province. Grass yearlings in Manitoba, they've moved into the larger operators. We don't see too many of the 50, 75 head operators on the grass anymore. It's hardly worthwhile tying up the grass for that few of cattle. Most of the fellows are running 500 head and plus, and there's a big demand for those grass type cattle right now, and a big demand for the Manitoba grass yearlings, in the fall. If you want to know where the cattle are in Canada, just take a look at this particular chart. It shows in Manitoba at 915,000, and that's down 30,000 cattle from the year before. We also saw some reductions in the cattle numbers in Saskatchewan and Alberta, a slight increase in British Columbia, a slight increase in Ontario as well. But, the three major cow-calf provinces, we've seen a big reduction in the number of cattle in those particular three provinces. So let's take a minute and take a look at the bred cows. Bred cow prices recovered at the end of 2022. There wasn't much interest at the start of the bred cow trade in October and early November in Western Canada. It did pick up when we got into late November and into December. Prices for the young cows, they traded from $1,650 to $2,400. We had predicted earlier in the year that we would see cows as high as $2,500. We didn't quite reach that plateau. Bred heifers were in short supply, especially in Manitoba. The few that were around traded from $1,700 to $2,450 if they were good enough to go back to the farm. But a lot of the heifers were worth more money as an open than a bred. We had a number of clients in Manitoba that sold bred heifers just by the pound, and they were averaging well between $1,800 and $1,900 for those heifers, and they weren't bringing that at the bred cow sales. I do really think that bred cows right now under $2,000 are a very good investment at this particular time. If you have the infrastructure, if you have the feed, and if you have the pasture, if you can get some credit or some money, I think now is a good time for the rebuild. I think that at $2,000 is a pretty good chance that you could get close to $1,800 for a steer calf here this fall. It doesn't take too long to reduce the debt load on those cows, and they could be a very good investment. I think if you wait down the road, we're going to see the cow market start to increase after 2023. And I'm not advising that you run out and buy $2,500 cows right now. I think there's lots of cows on the market in that $2,000 range, and in my opinion, they are a very good investment at this particular time. Let's look a little closer to home here in Manitoba. As of July of 2022, Manitoba had just over 400,000 beef cows. Now, Manitoba's been on a steady decline for the last 5 years. In this past year, Manitoba experienced the biggest culling rate of any of the provinces in Canada. We were over 13.5% on the cull, and that left us with just 8% of the national beef herd. As a matter of fact, experts are predicting that by the time that the figures come in at the 1st of July, that the real numbers could be closer to 20% decline in the cow numbers in Manitoba. As I mentioned, a lot of producers are going home. So what's that really mean? Well, in the last 10, 15, 20 years, we had a lot of people come over from Europe that got into the beef business here in Manitoba. We also had a lot of people come out of Alberta and Saskatchewan that were looking for cheaper farmland, and they bought some of that land getting into the cattle business. It hasn't been real good for them in the last few years. A lot of the Europeans have packed up and gone home. A lot of the fellows from Alberta and Saskatchewan have got out of the beef business or shrunk it down and have taken jobs, more of a 9-to-5 job or a job off the farm, and they're getting out of the beef business. So lots of producers giving up the ghost and going home. And of course, it's not hard to do. Once again, you can sell your farm pretty quickly. There's a pretty big lineup of guys wanting to buy farmland. A lot of them wanted to tear it up and make it into grain production and take it out of the cattle industry. When I started the presentation, we talked about increases in the prices, and I'm sure a lot of you were thinking, when is it going to happen, or if it's going to happen? Well, it's already started to happen. In January, we opened up the Manitoba feeder cattle market very strong. In January this year, we've already sold 26,000 cattle. That's up 21% from last year, and demand from Ontario was very strong. They were dictating the market on the very top end calves. Just to give you an idea, compared to a year ago, 4 to 600 pound steer calves up 79 cents, 6 to 800 pounders up 72, and the 8 to 1,000 pound steers were up 65 cents a pound higher than what they were last year. On the Manitoba feeder heifer market, it also opened up strong, but there was still a big differential between the heifers and the steers. The good 4 to 600 pound heifers were 53 cents higher, 6 to 800 pounders 51 cents higher than last year in January, and the 8 to 1,000 pound heifers were up 4 will go into the feedlots and not into the breeding programs. Now, the heifer market is always a contentious issue, and in 2023, producers can expect to still see a wide price differential between the steers and the heifers this fall. And that's always a bone of contention as to why the heifers are so far back from the steers. You know, at the peak this fall, we could see 45, 50 cents a pound differential spread between the steers and heifers due to the high cost of feeding heifers compared to steers. Also, we have to look at resale value. When it comes time to resell backgrounded heifers, you know, it's not uncommon to have only 5 or 6 major feedlots in Alberta looking for those kind of animals that feed heifers. But if I've got 5 or 6 feedlots looking for heifers, I'll have 20 to 25 feedlots looking for steers. So once again, demand dictates that the steer market will be higher. You know, the spread could tighten up if local producers decide to retain heifers for breeding, or if cow-calf operations look to expand and purchase heifers to put into the breeding program. We've seen it before. I mean, it wasn't all that many years ago in the spring that we saw heifer prices the same price as steers when they were going back to local producers to be put into the breeding programs. One thing that's very important is when we're looking at cattle prices, it's just as important as to who is buying the cattle. And of course, in Manitoba, Ontario has been a major influence on the Manitoba feeder cattle market, but they do buy a lot more steers than heifers. You know, purchases into Quebec this year have declined, and that's mainly due to the contraction of the feeding industry there. Without their subsidy programs from the provincial government, a lot of the cattle feeding feedlots and feeder barns shut down. The fellows started growing cash crops instead of corn, or selling their corn instead of selling it to cattle. They only have one packing plant in Ontario that buys their finished product, and that's really put a lot of downward pressure on the Quebec business. The other thing is the increased trucking rates. You know, this fall we paid from 16 cents to 20 cents a pound to move cattle from Manitoba into Ontario and Quebec, the highest rates that we've ever paid. So it makes those cattle delivered at about 25 cents per pound over what they pay for them here in Manitoba, and that makes them extremely strong cattle. And going into a market when you only have one buyer, it doesn't bode well for the Quebec cattle finishing business moving forward. You know, in Manitoba, we always take Alberta for granted, but they rank second in the number of cattle purchased out of Manitoba. Alberta takes a lot of heifers. They take a lot of the middle cut backgrounded cattle and some of the British type steers. They've always been aggressive, and they've been more aggressive in Manitoba in the last couple of years as they have more pen space and the feeding industry expands. You know, the U.S. right now, they're not buying a whole lot of feeder cattle out of Manitoba. They do set the floor price. You know, they're about 8 to 12 cents behind on the steers right now, but they're right on the doorstep when it comes to buying heifers. We could see Americans start to buy some heifers and ship them south here next week if we get a little break more on the exchange rate. Local demand, of course, is always strong, especially on the grass type steer cattle right now. A lot of those big grassland operators that we talked about earlier did not fill their inventory needs in the fall. The cost of backgrounding those cattle was considerably higher, and they thought that they would wait and buy a few more cash cattle in the spring, and they've stepped onto the market right into January and have really made those cattle under 750 pounds very strong on the steer market. We look at the current cash market that we just quoted for you in January, and they look extremely high. But actually, the futures market supports the current cash market for the cattle. You know, one of the things that I always remind the cattle producers here in Manitoba is that when you're looking on the prices online, a lot of those are delivered to Alberta, delivered to Ontario, so you have to allow for the trucking. Now, Prices on steers delivered to Alberta, if you are living west of Brandon, you would take off about 7 cents a pound. If you're between Brandon and Portage la Prairie, about 8 cents a pound. And if you're in the Interlake or the Steinbach area, then you're probably looking at 8.5 to 9 cents a pound to move those cattle into Alberta. Going into Ontario, depending where we're at, we're anywhere from 16 to 18 cents a pound to get them into Ontario. If you're further west, or you're going into Quebec, about 20 cents seems to be the going rate here this month. But here are some actual sales on some forward contracts. So it gives you an idea of what kind of real money is out there. August delivery for grass cattle, these are steers off the grass at 850 pounds, 274 and a half. There's more of them going in September at 850 pounds at 281.50. September delivery for 1,000-pound steers off the grass was 265. Some heifers at 950 pounds at 238 to 240. So if you look at the Western Canada Price Index for February the 3rd, 620-pound steers were averaging 290.60, while the cash price in Manitoba was actually 305. Now, if you take those prices, even the 305 price in Manitoba, and you put the current cost to gain against those cattle, the interest rate, and you can sell them at that 281.50 coming off the grass, because there's pretty good profit in those cattle. There's pretty good profit in the 1,000-pound cattle, and I think that the prices on those cattle are going to get higher as we move along. The cattle that were contracted in December were not nearly as high as these cattle that were just contracted in January. So there's no doubt, as a cow-calf producer, you like the prices that we're talking about. So how do you get a chance to take advantage of those prices when you're not going to sell your cattle, for another 6-7 months? Well, risk management is something that everybody should be considering. And as a cow-calf producer, I think that the livestock price insurance program is something that's worthwhile keeping track of. It allows you to manage the potential downfall in the market, and any expert in the investment business will always tell you to cover the downside of the market, to make sure that you have that looked after. Don't worry about the upside of the market. Manage the downside of the market so that you don't have a wreck. It's like buying fire insurance for your house. You hope that you don't have to use it, but if you do, it stops you from getting yourself into a big wreck. It's important to establish your level of insurance and what your break-evens are to hit that level. You may not have to have the top insurance, and don't let the cost of the premium scare you away. Rather, look at the coverage that you need and then the premium required. You may not need the top coverage, so you may not have to pay the top premium. It's really important that you establish those break-evens to know where your insurance level would be, and then you can figure out what it's going to cost you. Every week I get inquiries about forward contracting for cattle from producers in Manitoba, and yes, there are forward contract deliveries available in Manitoba for deferred deliveries, but they don't always work for cow-calf producers. We contract a lot of cattle with JGL, and most of the licensed brokers and dealers in Manitoba also have the opportunity to offer forward contracts. As a producer, you need to remember that you need 60,000-pound lots of uniform cattle, and the bigger the volume, the more loads of uniform cattle you got, the more interest you're going to have from the buyers. So it works really well for the guys that background cattle and buy calves. It works really well for the guys that add a few more calves to their own calf crop. But if you only got 150 cows, it's pretty hard to get 75 uniform steers to put on one particular lot. The other thing that's changed quite a bit is that most of the buyers will ask you, the seller, for an asking price before they'll even open discussions on contracting. Contracts change almost by the hour. They're influenced by the exchange rate. They're influenced by the price of grain. They're influenced by the Chicago Mercantile Futures. And so unless you're sure exactly what you want for the cattle, when you're going to sell them, when you want them delivered, what weight it's going to be, and what slide you're going to use, most of the buyers won't talk about the contracting prices, because those contracting prices can expire very, very quickly. The contracts change daily, and sometimes they're not airtight. They could be subject to caveats such as border closures, which is pretty standard in most of the forward delivery contracts for deferred delivery. And for heaven's sakes, make sure that you know who you're contracting with, that it's a reputable firm, and that they're bonded and licensing, because there are no standard contracts. Everybody has their own custom contracts, and make sure you know what you're signing when you get into a contract situation. The exchange rate is one of the very important fundamentals of the cattle market. And we saw a big drop in the dollar in 2022. It went from 79 cents US down to 73 cents US. And just to show you what a big impact that would have, a 1 cent change in the exchange moves the price of a 500-pound steer calf 6 cents Canadian. If you're selling fed cattle into the US, 1 cent change in the exchange moves the fed cattle price $2.60 a pound Canadian. Just to give you an idea how important and how much influence it has on the market, the increase in the fall calf prices that we saw in November and December were driven by the dollar, not by supply management. It was the dollar that made those prices go up, not the shortage of cattle. Now, looking forward in 2023, the experts in the banking business are predicting that the exchange should run between a low of 74 and a top of 77, which is much the same as what it was at the end of 2022, and that'll make predicting the markets a lot more accurate, a lot more easy, especially in the cattle side of the business. This chart just shows you the weekly value of the Canadian dollar. The blue line is 2022. The broken black is the 5-year average. And of course, the red is the start of 2023. So you'll see at the end of the year when the fall prices took a fairly good jump and they held fairly good in December, where the previous year the market collapsed in December, was all dollar driven. It was not supply driven. We have not seen a supply driven market yet. We're seeing just the tip of it in January. But at the end of last year, it was strictly a dollar-driven market. Of course, feed prices are also one of the big fundamentals and one of the big market influencers. Drought conditions in the U.S. drove the grain prices to record levels in 2022. American feedlot operators are quite comfortable feeding corn at $5. Get a little edgy at $6, but this year when they had to pay $8 and $8.50 a bushel, that certainly butt into the profits and actually pushed a lot of them into losses on the cattle. Corn prices have the biggest influence on the cattle market right now. Barley prices not as relevant as they used to be. In Canada, most of the good barley is going into the pork business or into the milling business, and a lot of the Alberta feedlots now are importing corn from the U.S. on a regular basis. If you remember, about a year or maybe a little longer than that ago, there was the talk of a rail strike in Canada, and certainly made a lot of the Alberta feedlots pretty nervous because they only had 3 to 4 weeks worth of feed in inventory right at the feedlots, and had that rail strike come to be and it lasted any length of time, it certainly would have put some pressure on the Alberta feedlots to get that American corn up here. The corn prices and the feed costs in general are expected to decrease this fall. We've already seen that being worked into the cattle prices here in January, as a lot of the guys are predicting lower feed prices, and they've added a little bit to the cattle, and that's the gamble you take on the cattle feeding business. When feedlots are looking at replacing inventory, they look at the weight of the cattle and when those cattle will be harvested. They take that date and work backwards to get their formula on what they're prepared to pay for the cattle. Now, we look at the fed cattle prices in Canada. The Canadian packers have contracted enough fed cattle to cover the first quarter of 2023, and that allows them to control the cash market. They won't have to reach out too hard to be able to buy cattle, as they've got a big percentage of their kill already in priced and already committed to the plant. As we look at the futures moving forward, of course, we have a low of 211.75 in February, a high of 221 and a quarter in April. May also looks pretty good. But looking way down the line into December, some of the Alberta feedlots have been offered $2.20 for December. And as of the mid of this week, that was a $4 plus basis over the December futures. So it just showed that the packers know they're going to have to reach out and pay some more money for some fed cattle. And I expect that price at 220 will even get higher once we get into 2024. Now, we just came off a record year in the U.S. 2022 was a record year for beef production and beef harvesting in the U.S. Let's take a look at what we did here in Canada. And remember, the Americans are 10 times bigger than we are. We slaughtered 3.2 million cattle here in Canada. That was up 21,000 head. We harvested about 50,000 steers less, and that really surprised me, and it's a mystery to me. I've not been able to find out where all those steers went. But the interesting thing was we were over 1 million heifers harvested. That was up 52,000 from the year before. Certainly, that's a lot of heifers that should have ended up in the breeding programs that went into the harvesting program. We had a big cow kill here in Canada. We harvested 470,000. That was up 20,000 from the year before. We're down about 1,900 bulls, but they really don't count because most of what we showed here now does not include the exports to the U.S. What I can tell you is that the Western Canadian cow harvest was up 5.4%, another big jump in the number of cows that were harvested here in Canada. Packer utilization is also a very interesting thing to look at. The Western Packers in the last half of 2022 ran at 96% capacity. Cash sales for delivery deferred were held off 6 to 8 weeks. That meant if you priced cattle on the cash market, you could wait 6 to 8 weeks before those cattle were picked up for harvest. In Eastern Canada, they were running at 85%, but they were current on deliveries. Most of the animals there were being picked up from the farms after they were priced about 5 to 7 days down the road. Certainly, the Packers were able to manipulate the cash price when they were bidding out at 6 to 8 weeks. That'd give them even bigger profit margins. Moving forward into 2023, the Packers are expected to run at 80 to 85%. We probably won't see any Saturday kills in Canada, certainly in the U.S. They're expecting to be running at 80 to 85% as well, and they've already advertised that they will do very few Saturday kills in 2023. First of all, they don't have enough fed cattle to warrant it. Second of all, they don't have enough staff to run the extra Saturday kill week after week. So where do we see the future of the cattle industry? Well, once the drought in the south and western Canada is over, supplies of cattle will tighten up even more than they are now. We'll see less cull cows being offered. That'll short the offering of slaughtered cows, increase demand, and increase the prices. Producers will start to retain more heifers for breeding, and that'll also short the feeder cattle supplies on offer. And of course, a smaller supply, a stronger demand should support higher prices. What I can tell you for sure is that we have not seen the supply-driven peak prices yet. The peak prices that we've seen up to the end of 2022 were driven by the dollar. We're starting to see some of the effects of supply-driven pricing in January, but I think when we get into the fall run of 2023 and the spring round of 2024, we'll see where the real supply-driven peak prices come, and it leaves lots of room for upward movement. Of course, to have a healthy cattle business, we have to sell the beef. We produce beef. We don't produce cattle. And if we look at the consumer price index here and the price comparisons, retail beef is the red line at the top, holding very strong, and we are starting to see a little bit of consumer resistance. The blue line is pork, the green line is poultry. Both of them had bad years in 2022. At the end of the year, exports were down for both poultry and pork. That meant that more had to be consumed domestically, especially in the U.S., and that meant that the pricing was dropped in comparison to beef. So it's not hard to see where consumers on a limited income and disposable income are turning especially towards pork products for their protein needs. So every good story has a downside, and we'd be negligent if we didn't talk about some of the things that could hold the price increases back a little bit. Of course, we mentioned consumer demand. Consumers are starting to show some resistance to the beef prices at the store. When you go to the store right now, you're having to outbid the export buyers to buy your own product to eat here in Canada. That's why prices are strong, and we don't expect a whole bunch of relief up on the current prices. To support the current higher prices, the export markets have got to be strong for both the Canadian and U.S. products, especially the U.S. moving a lot more product into China. They move out, the more they need to replace with Canadian product, and they're our biggest trading partner. Also, Canada Beef and the rest of the exporting group have done a really good job of developing markets in Europe, in Asia, Japan, Mexico, and we're moving a lot more beef than what we used to right out of Canada direct. Of course, interest rates are getting higher, and that means your inventories at the feed lot, your feed inventories, everything else is costing you more money to operate, and that could have a slight down effect on what the packers and what the feedlots are prepared to pay. Trucking rates have doubled in the last 3 years. As I mentioned earlier, we've never paid so much to haul the cattle, and it looks like there's very little relief on the horizon for the trucking rates. Fuel prices look like they're going to stay fairly strong on the diesel, and we're running out of trucks. We've had less trucks on the road hauling cattle this year than the year before, and it's going to be a very big problem in the industry moving forward. It's going to cost you more to run your operation. The increase in input costs for cattle producers is rising faster than the cattle prices, so profitability is still going to be pretty questionable on some of the ranches. Good ranch management and a sharp pencil are going to be important moving forward. If you don't, you may get caught up into higher prices, but you may not be making any more money. The feed grains have to drop to see a continued higher feeder market, and it looks like they're going to drop. Certainly, everybody is banking on cheaper feed grain prices moving forward. If we get a drought this summer, that's going to be the black swan that we've all been nervous about coming onto the cattle market. Watch and look at the planting intentions this spring. Will give you a pretty good idea of what kind of acres of corn are going to go into the south. And as I mentioned, corn extremely important on the cattle market. We're producing more beef. Despite a reduction in the number of cows, we produce more pounds of beef per cow. Cows in Canada and the United States right now, in some breeds, are producing 41% more beef from their offspring than they were 50 years ago. The carcasses are bigger and the quality of the product is better. Carcasses are going up 2, 3, 5 pounds a year. Genetics are better. We're doing a better job of feeding the cattle, feeding them longer. We got more AAAs than we've ever had before. One of the things in the beef business that we haven't looked at in the past and you're going to hear more of, it's going to be beef on dairy. Remember that term, beef on dairy. Dairy farmers are now using sex semen, and a lot of them are breeding their cows to Angus bulls. The offspring, the calves of these animals, are way more popular with the cattle feedlots than what the straight Holsteins were, and the packer discounts for these beef on dairy crossbred cattle are not as severe as the Holstein steers. To give you an idea of how much impact they've had in the beef market, coming off a record year in 22, 7% of the beef that was produced came off the beef on dairy animals, and it's predicted to jump to 15% in 2024. The dairy industry is expanding, and the offspring of those that do not go back into the breeding programs are going to end up into the meat business. I'm just about out of time, so I'm going to do a real quick conclusion here. You can expect higher cattle markets for the next 2 to 3 years, significantly higher. That could get stretched into 4 to 5 years, depending on the weather situation. Strong demand for the Manitoba cattle will continue from all regions. Geographically, we are the best place to be selling cattle. We're close to Alberta. We're close to the U.S. Trucking rates into Ontario will give Manitoba cattle producers a real good advantage. The backgrounding business here is very, very strong. Profitability is still going to be a challenge with increased input costs for a lot of the ranchers. So once again, good ranch management, a sharp pencil is going to be required to work your way through these changes we're going to see in the cattle business. For sure, look to rebuild now, not later. If you have the infrastructure, if you have the pasture, if you have the land base, if you have the feed, if you can get cash and you have the desire, now is the time to rebuild. Don't leave it till 2024. We're going to see a big increase in the bred cow stock and the heifer prices for breeding. Get your inventory put together now. And of course, guys, keep those 2023 newborns alive. They're going to be worth a lot of money this fall or next spring when you go to sell them. It's going to be worthwhile going out to the barn to calve those cows this year. And I'll pass on to you what I was told by a cattleman one time. Hang on to that cow's tail. She's going to pull you through the shit, and we've got lots of good times ahead. And I hope that I've given you a reason for a little bit of optimism in the cattle business here right today. That pretty well wraps it up for me. It's been my pleasure today to be on Stock Talk and to share my thoughts on the cattle business with you. I hope that once again I've given you a reason for a little bit of optimism. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I'll do my best to find a good answer for you. Once again, it's been my pleasure, and good luck in the cattle industry.
Thank you, Rick, for that presentation. Rick has a lot of optimism for the beef industry, which should be music to beef producers' ears. The U.S. cow herd is the smallest since 1962, so supplies are definitely down. Canfax is predicting that the U.S. beef supplies will be down 5 to 7% in Q1 to Q2. So how can we manage our cattle to ensure they sell for the highest price possible? To discuss prepping calves for sale, we have Alan Monroe of Killarney Auction Mart. Now I'd like to welcome Alan. We'll just bring up his presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's Alan Monroe here from Killarney Auction Mart, and I've been asked to talk about a few things that people do right and could do better when it comes to preparing their calves to sell. A little shameless self-promotion to start with. I have the Killarney Auction Mart, south side of Killarney, regular show list sales every single Monday, special sales like red cow sales and extra feeders on Thursday. A little bit of background about myself. I grew up in Perth, Ontario, in Eastern Ontario, now we're southwest of Ottawa. My folks' background of cattle, then they had cow-calf. I worked on dairies, worked other beef places as a kid, and then I worked across Western Canada on commercial and purebred places since the mid-90s. I started feeding my own cattle and working at Heartland Verd in 2004. 2007, I moved over to Merrifield, Saskatchewan, where I ran a background in grazing cow-calf operation. I was buying for Cattle X. I was export testing, custom weighing. I had a number of things on the go there and doing some order buying at the same time. 2011, I sold that place and moved to Killarney to run the auction mart here for Scott and Laurie Campbell Fraser Auctions. And then in February 2015, I was able to purchase that from them. Most cattle in Manitoba are sold through the auction system. There are different ways of selling them. It's not all through auction. We have the regular sale, a pre-sort, show list, direct sales, and then video and internet sales. These all have their benefits. I've worked with all these systems and on both ends, buying and selling, and they all have their good and bad points. The regular sale, it's been tried and true. It's been around forever. Cattle come in the day before. They go in a dry pen. They stand there. They're weighed as they come into the ring on sale day, and then they'll sold by live auction, true price discovery, and go into the orders pens. We can customize their sort as the day goes on. If buyers are needing something that can or cannot be put together, we can sort of work with them in that. And then there's a pre-sort that started probably 30 plus years ago. We get the larger packages. We commingle cattle. Everyone's go into the same pens. They're sorted by quality, color, size, and everything else. The day two before the sale, their pencil shrunk and again sold by live auction. In the last 10 years, we've started seeing more show list offerings. It's St. Rose was the pioneer in that area in Manitoba and starting the show list, and is certainly one of the best at doing it. Buyers will know whose cattle they are buying. Any vaccinations that they need to know is there. The one owner packages are pre-weighed with pencil strength the day before the sale, and again sold by live auction. You go back to the time before the auction marts and right through now, there's direct sale has always been an option where you just sell it right to a buyer, feedlot, or whatever. You do have less movement of the cattle. They're going from your place to the feedlot or the assembly yard. The price before they leave home. You're haggling. You're determining the price through negotiation. You and your buyer sit down and try and come up with a price that you can both live with. We had satellite sales, and then that's turned into internet sales with the advent of the internet, and still have video sales in some markets. The cattle are described by an agent from whoever the selling agent is. They'll go out, take some videos, take some pictures, put down the type of cattle they are, what size they are, the weight spread, quality, frame size, everything else. And then they'll put the rules like delivery time, price slide, shrink, weighing conditions, everything else. And that same idea though, they'll be sold and then they'll go get picked up and weighed at a later date. The show list, not everyone knows how this works. Basically the cattle come in the day, maybe 2 days before the sale. They're sorted into one owner packages, and then they are weighed with a pencil shrink. After the weighed, they're thrown in feed and water. Any cattle that don't fit into these packages, because we generally don't put 1s, 2s, and 3s into the show list, they'll be put into a dry pen and sold regular sale once the show list pens are all sold. And once everything is weighed and sorted and the list is made up, and we'll put the vaccinations, if they're verified beef, if they've had implants or not, or whatever, we'll put that on there and send that all out to the buyers the night before the sale. Pre-sort, similar but different. Cattle are sorted and weighed the day or two before the sale. Pencil shrink's applied based on mileage, same idea. Basically, it's sort of like running a regular sale did before your pre-sort. Instead of having buyers buying the cattle and putting them in their pens, you have a sorter from the market that will put them into their pens that way to try and make those bigger uniform groups. So it takes a lot more time to get ready for the sale. You can sell them awful quick once you're done. So it does allow non-uniform calf crops to get into some of those more uniform packages and that. So say it has its place too, for sure. And say whether it's video sales or internet or direct sales or whatever, the biggest thing you can do to help your bottom line is to pick a breed. You want uniformity. You want to make as large a package as you possibly can to get their attention. Cattle that have similar genetics, they have the same environment, the same feed program, everything, they will feed well together at the next part. So that's where you want to get that uniformity. And the very first thing to do is have uniformity in your bull battery. Just pick a breed. It does not matter what breed you pick, just pick one. We have the guys that come, they have 3 black bulls, they have a black limo, they have a Semitol, and they have an Angus, and those cattle don't fit together, so they have to be sorted separate. So just pick one breed. If you have a non-uniform cow herd and you pick similar type bulls of the same breed, maybe even related, you can get some uniformity in your calf crop. On the next step to that is trying to have as tight a calving period as you possibly can. Get as many of those cows bred the first cycle. If a calf is gaining 2 pounds a day, every cycle that cow misses is going to cost you 42 pounds. When we're sorting our lighter weight calves, we try and keep them within 50 pounds of each other in our packages. Once they get up a little bigger, we'll spread that to 75. But they have to be similar weight, and the easiest way to get them similar weight is have them born right about the same time. Vaccination. This is one that not everyone sees the immediate benefit from by vaccinating. Your benefit is having healthier cattle at home. One BVD rec can pay for a lifetime of vaccine. So that's the first thing to know. And industry-wide, death loss, pull rates, that all is money that just goes away. And if the feedlots have too high death loss, that is less money they'll have the next round when they come to buy calves. And don't think they don't know that. And we're traveling a long ways. There's a lot of these cattle going east, and we get into the fall situation where we're wet and we're muddy out here, and we're wet and muddy in Ontario. When they get to the other end, non-vaccinated calves will fall apart. The buyers tell me this regularly, that they will not settle in. They'll get sick. They'll take more new floor, res floor. They'll take more Micotil, whatever. And once you start treating those calves, that hurts their performance. So ideally, they'd have 2 rounds of modified live vaccination. There's times where we have started vaccinating calves after a sale on a Monday. We maybe using a nasal enforce to get in their system quicker. We give them some Draxxin, long-acting antibiotic, just to get that in their system Monday night. Because if those calves come off the cow on Sunday, we sell them Monday. It's Tuesday, possibly Wednesday, in the odd case even Thursday before they get on a truck to go to Ontario, and then they don't get there till say Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. So they could potentially be a week under stress before they get any of that vaccinations in their system. So the best way to keep those calves healthy is to get them vaccinated at home. When I was had my cow herd, I was vaccinating the calves at turnout. I'd revaccinate them a month before weaning because I was buying in high-risk calves and feeding them in the pen right next door. And it was absolutely amazing how well those vaccinations work to keep those calves healthy. So you may not get paid immediately more, but sometimes you will. We do have times where the buyers will say, geez, my guy will not take anything unless it's had, a round of Express or Bovie or whatever one you use. Modified live is absolutely best. So now this is castration. This is a spot where people lose a lot of money. We will see discounts of up to 50 cents a pound on a bull calf compared to a steer calf. And at 600 pounds, that's $300 that you're giving up by not castrating. That bull calf cannot gain enough extra weight to make up that discount. The earlier you can castrate, the better. A day old, do it at birth, do it at branding, slip a band over them, use your scalpel, cut them out. Just make sure they're done properly and they're done young. Never ever use Berdizzos. That's a sore point to a lot of us in the business that have had to deal with the mistakes that get made. That's the easiest one to screw up and it's the hardest one to fix. So take those, weld them together, throw them in the river. We don't need those in the business. If you do your calves late, that's fine. There's lots of purebred breeders. Lots of people just they're calving in May, June or something, and they can't get them castrated till fall. That's fine. Use a big band, use a scalpel, whatever. Do them properly as soon as you can. You have to be careful with flies and whatnot, but get them done as early as you can, because those cattle, the longer they are a bull, the more they will be a bull. They'll get that head, they'll get that neck. They won't fatten as easy. They won't marble as well. And then when it comes time to market those calves, if you have some that look like a bull, there's chances are it's either you did it improperly or you did it late. And if you did it late, make sure you tell whoever's receiving those cattle that they were done by this method at this time. Last week we had a sale. There was a bunch of calves come in, a little rougher head. They had been bulls. And you could just see the buyers sort of looking at them and studying what they were thinking. And the farmer was sitting there, and I said, "Hey, Chris," I said, "when were these castrated?" And he said, "The knife cut by the vet on December the 12th." And the buyers relaxed, and they all told me that made him $50 a head by being there and making that information available. So just tell us, because we have to pass that information on. Tell the truth. If they were all banded a day old and they look like a bull, well, you left one up there. It'll be sold accordingly, so just tell the truth, do the best job you possibly can, and if you are doing some late cuts, you're banding them, you're cutting them, whatever, if you have time, shave the hair off their head. They will look so much better when it comes time to sell them. Dehorning, horns is still an issue. We see it some sales more than others. The easiest way to take horns off is through bull selection. Just buy those homozygous polled bulls and then take that issue away. But you get a lot of performance in the horn cattle. We know that. So if you do have horn cattle, just get them done as early as you possibly can. Same as castration. The later you leave it, then you're going to have to use some pain meds. Code of practice says, we have to do that. We don't want to hurt the cattle. We don't want to hurt the performance. So if you do it when they're very young, it's okay, but once they start getting some size on them, once that horn bud attaches, you have to use some pain medication to help those calves through. Now, I know we don't eat the horns and whatnot, but they do bruise the other animals. And say the bigger they are, the bigger deal is to take them off. It's like cutting your finger off. And then the other big issue we had a number of horn cattle at this recent sale, and there was probably 3 of them broke their horns. So they're in a pen, and then they break the horn off, they bleed. So, and it's the same thing when they go on a truck. Those holes in the side of their pot, the horns get caught in there, they break them off. So they get to the other end, they come off, and everyone's covered in blood. It looks terrible. So that's why, in a lot of longer distance hauling, the order will simply be, do not buy horned calves. I wouldn't dare try and sneak a horned calf into one of the top pens when we're sorting, because they will take it out every single time, because they don't want to deal with having to take it off, or they don't want to deal with if it breaks off. So take them off as early as you possibly can, and just do them better. If you wait late and they get that square head on them, they will take those out of the top end pens too. They're just not as pretty. If they're paying top dollar, they still want pretty. Feeding, this is where a lot of the money is made and lost. And this comes down to knowing your cattle. If your big exotics, your Shars, your Sims, the more you can, they do need feed. They do look better with some flesh on them to square them out, and that, we sell them by the pound. We do. So on those ones, you can feed a little harder. You get your little more British ones, your Angus, your Shorthorn, Hereford. If you feed them too much, they will make weight, but they will put fat on, and they'll get roly-poly, and their feed conversion won't be as good. They won't get as big when they are finished, and they will get discounted. So you're going to spend more feeding those cattle more grain, and then you're going to get a discount for doing it. So it comes down to knowing your cattle and how hard you can push them, and then say you need to feed them hard enough that you're going to, when they walk on that scale, it's going to push them down, but you don't want to hurt them, that they can that they're going to be discounted for you having killed them with kindness is really what happens. You end up paying for that feed twice. Tagging, we've had to put tags in these cattle for 20 some years. That's nothing new. You're going to have to do it well ahead of time. If you're doing it just before the truck gets there and you're running through the chute, or you're trying to tag them as they're in the load and chute going up to the truck, you're stressing those cattle, and it's unnecessary. It's going to cause them to shrink more weight off, and it's going to make them harder to deal with for you, the trucker, and everyone else. So do it when you're doing your vaccine. Do it when they're babies. Maybe you lose a few tags, but to replace a few tags is far cheaper than having to run everything through the system and tag them as you're heading to your payday. I'm going to briefly touch on transfer of care. This is part of the new transportation regulations. When you drop cattle off, you are supposed to bring with you a document that tells the receiver when those cattle last had feed, water, and rest, and also if there's anything that is compromised, it's got a limp, it's got a cut, it's got whatever, that has to be noted, and then say you are transferring the care from you to us, and so you have to do that. Give that to your custom hauler if you're getting a custom trucker or not. This came in a few years ago. There was supposed to be an education period. COVID screwed that up. They're trying to educate now, but they're getting closer and closer to enforcement. I have had customers that have had warnings, and they're told that, I've warned you twice, next time you get a fine. So look up what you need to do. We're sending out with our checks when we mail the checks out after a sale. You can talk to us, and just bring that. If it's not an official document, you can write it on a piece of paper, you can whatever, but you are supposed to give that to whoever you send the cattle to. Temperament, this is a big issue that can be done. It takes a long time to improve. It is a result of genetics and environment. For years we knew the limo cattle were insane. That's just the way it was, and they recognize that, and they came out with an EPD for docility, and they've made good progress. Like there's lots of Limousin cattle around that are very easy to work with now, as opposed to say 15 years ago. So hats off to the limo breed for making that improvement, because we all know wild cows, wild bulls, they make wild calves. That's the genetic part. But on the environment part, I know we're feeding silage, we're using bale processors, we're using quads, side-by-sides, horses, whatever. We don't really have to walk through the cattle very often. But if you can make a concerted effort to take 10 minutes a day and walk through them and talk to them, it will make a difference. It'll make a difference when you have to run through the chute yourself. It'll make a difference when you're calving those cows. It'll make a difference, when you want your family to come out and help you. No one wants to go and feel that they're going to get killed when they go to help you. We all know that if someone has wild cattle, to send them us. We accept that. That's the way it is. That's where they should go. Just get them out of the system. But all the cattle don't need to be wild. If the only time they see you on foot, you have a needle in your hand or a prod or a knife or something, you're inflicting pain, they will remember that, and they won't like it, and they won't like you on foot. They won't like me on foot. So this makes them even more dangerous for you to handle, and everyone else has to deal with them. They're more likely to hurt themselves and hurt us. They're hard on the facilities. Dollars and cents, the shrink for wild cattle compared to calm cattle is exponential. It's at least double. When they are charging at us and they're climbing over each other and they're trying to jump fences and and that the pounds are just melting off them. So you're losing weight every time you work with them if you never make it a good experience for them. And when it comes to feeding, your gains are not nearly as good on wild calves. If they're constantly a state of fear, you walk past the pen and they're ripping around in circles, they're not gaining. They're running those pounds off. They'll shrink more when they're handled. They won't gain the same. And then, at the far end, when they're fat, if they are difficult to deal with, they are more likely to degrade as a dark cutter. So it's one of those things that it takes a long time to get it where we want it to be, but it can be done with a little bit of effort and make life easier for everyone. Sorting at home, this is huge. If you want to have packages to sell, you're basically, your choice is either sell your entire calf crop at one time, so we can go in and we can pull out those packages, or I have a number of customers that they don't want to put all their calves in one sale, so they'll send 20 steers this week, and they're weighing 650 and that, and we look at them and say, geez, there's a good package, send them to the scale. Or they're a little up and down. Let's split them in two. So we got some 675 weights and some 6 1/4. We get 2 packages, and they get the benefit of having those groups. And it takes a lot of stress every time we have to work them down the alley. It causes shrink. So if you can have the steers and the heifers, that's one less trip we have to make down the alley, and that will save you money right there. So if you do want to sell in multiple sales, don't just gate run, sort out a package. We have these people that will do that, and it all helps. And it doesn't matter whether it's a show list, a pre-sort, or a regular sale, or if you're doing direct sales, you need that uniformity. And so you will have to say, pick a breed, have a tight calving season, look after the details, get them vaccinated, and then sort them out down into packages. In 2009, when I was selling my grass cattle, the market was terrible. We were selling 9-weight steers for 93 cents. I brought mine in every week, and I would sort out a package of the best that fit together, and I would market those. That way, then as you empty that pen out, you get rid of the biggest ones or the pasture, whatever. Your lighter ones will start to catch up. So it's well worth taking some time to sort and know what you have. A few final thoughts. I've always promoted that people come watch their calves sell, whether it's whatever type of sale it is. Come watch them sell, see your calves sell, see your neighbor's calves sell, see which ones the buyers preferred, see which ones they didn't, and just study it and see what you can do to make yours worth a little bit more. Ask the staff at the market, ask the buyers. They're not that scary. They will tell your opinion. They all have opinions. They're happy to share them with you. If they could say, geez, you fed them a few too many oats, and so we couldn't pay the same as we paid for those others that were, just a little bit on the greener side. So go to the sale, pay attention, ask questions. With COVID, it made it harder to do, and it just broke my heart when we couldn't let people in to watch the calves sell. So lots of us started live streaming our sales, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, whatever, so people could still watch those sales. So you can, you don't actually. If you're not selling calves, it's a good way to keep up with the market. Just go to one of our sites and, you watch a little bit of, watch some cows sell, watch some packages sell, and you can get an idea of what the market's doing without actually having to go physically to the market every year. But when you sell your calves, I've seen more times where someone made money because the buyers had a question and the seller was there to answer it. So, we're all in this to try and make you succeed and make you as much money as you can, because if you succeed, we all succeed. And if you ever have any questions, I can be reached at 523-6161. And talk to your markets, talk to the buyers, and see what you can do to make things just a little bit better and put a few more dollars in your pocket. I sure appreciate the opportunity to talk to you this afternoon. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe got a little bit out of it, and we will talk to you another time. Thank you very much.
Don't forget to unmute yourself, Sean. There you go.
Thanks, Alan, for that informative presentation. Alan covered a lot of different useful tips on how to prep your calves and get more money for them when they're sold, whether that's genetics, calving period, sorting, vaccinations, and more. So a buyer once told me to get top dollar for your calves. Can't be any nuts, no horns. Calves must be uniform, healthy, uniform as peas in a pod, and have hair and hips like Tina Turner. So I think Alan reaffirmed a lot of that. So I'd like to thank our speakers, Rick and Alan, for sharing their wealth of knowledge that they have on cattle marketing. They had great presentations that they shared with us. So our upcoming webinars, we have a couple left. March 9th, we will be looking at bull soundness evaluation with Deanne Wilkinson and bull buying tips with Andrea Bertholet. And then on April 13th, we will look at forage and pasture management. Rick mentioned it's worthwhile looking at the calf price insurance. It's now available. It just became available at the start of February. So this is the current coverage levels as well as the premiums. So if you want to have top coverage, you can get $2.92 per pound for a 6-weight steer, and your premium will be $7. So you can get coverage of $17.52 per calf, and that will cost you $42. You don't have to take the top coverage. If you wanted to, say, look at lower coverage of $2.74 a pound, you can get that for $1.99 per hundredweight. So then that would cost you $12 a calf for coverage of $16.44. So this is available until June. The coverages and the premiums will adjust as futures and cash prices and the dollar changes. So make sure if you're thinking of taking out some coverage to just monitor the levels that are available on an ongoing basis. So we have a number of livestock and forage specialists available to help you across the province, whether it's related to rations or feeds or forages, grazing plans, and more. Give one of us a call. And if you need to pick up a calving book, if you're starting calving, or if you'd like to know what varieties to choose for your different crops that you're growing, or you want the annual forage information that was tested the last couple of years, pick up a Seed Manitoba. We have forage adaptation guides, beef, cow calf cost production, and different livestock and beef forage fact sheets. So you can get that from one of the specialists or from one of the 10 Mask and Manitoba Ag offices across the province. We also have a wealth of knowledge on our website. Feel free to check that out at Manitoba Agriculture. And that concludes our Stock Talk for today. Thank you for joining, and I hope you'll join us next time on March the 9th.